Why your dog might be having a hard time with guests, and some simple tips on how to help. If you feel like your dog struggles when people come over to visit and they're acting like a doorway security guard, you're not alone. Now, there are a few common reasons why this happens, and luckily, some ways to make things and help things go smoother. What I'll do next is share my screen and dive into some of these topics very quickly. The first part of this is the dog's getting access too soon to the guests to greet them. And the problem with this is that what can happen is whatever your dog was doing before the door opened and they met them is likely what you're going to get more of. Okay. So they're going to get instant access, which means you might be unintentionally reinforcing, barking, lunging, growling, all kinds of stuff like that. Okay. The other piece of it is that your dog is initially meeting them for a heightened state of mind, whether that's from excitement or it's from fear, distrust, anxiety. But any elevated outward manifestation of behavior, like excitement or barking, those things are less ideal ways to introduce someone. So that's number one. They're getting access to people too soon. The second part about this is how your guests act towards your dog make things worse. So you've got someone who's super friendly, someone's neutral, and someone who's scared, for example. You might see three separate ways of how your dog actually behaves depending on the guest. So I want you to look through that lens. Oh, my dog's actually much better with this family member. Well, what do they do when they come in? Maybe they're more neutral. Maybe they're more slower paced physically. Maybe the people who the dog doesn't do great with are overly, maybe just louder in general, maybe too direct with the dog, really want the dog to love them. So they try a little bit too hard, which is off-putting to the dog. So the second piece is like, well, how does your guest act? Now, what's the best way to, interact or engage with a dog? It's like, just don't. It's the simple answer. So obviously, I'll get more into that in a moment. But if your dog is having a tough time with guests, you want your guests to kind of be essentially neutral to them and really not give the dog a lot to feed off of, positively or negatively. Because what we can do is bring their level of intensity down from like a reactionary mindset to a responsive mindset by just simply relaxing and not doing a whole lot. The third part where, sometimes things go astray is that the dog actually sniffs the person, but that doesn't mean the sniff is an invitation for affection. So what we're going to do is not pet. Not yet, anyways. So just think of it, for instance, like meeting a family member, or maybe not a family member. Let's say someone for the first time, and shaking their hand is a lot different than, meeting them and then giving them a big embracing hug. They're probably not ready for that, and it's probably also not like reasonable in the context of like a work environment, for example. So think about a sniff is not an invitation for affection. What we want to look at is where the dog's body language is. So if their nose is the closest thing and they're scenting, that's kind of like an equivalent of a handshake, kind of curious about you, would like to know a little bit more. It doesn't mean I trust you yet or want to be friends or want to be physically closer to you. So keep that in mind. Now, the simple ways to actually kind of shift this around is number one, restrict access. Now, it doesn't mean for long, but we're gonna maybe put them in their crate or we're gonna have them on a leash. This is my beautiful leash right here. Okay. So what we want to do is limit the dog's access to the people until the dog's calmed down and de-escalated enough where they're in more of that responsive mindset before we actually give them access to the people. So that's like the simplest thing you can absolutely do. We just also want to make sure that when the person enters, they're not going to be walking past the dog in physical proximity, going to go and sit down, for example. So you might just have the dog off to the side in a crate or on a leash tethered to something on the opposite end of the room, or on a leash with, a different family member or something where the guest isn't going to have to walk by them at, a very close proximity. Second part of this is Well, it's pretty easy. You've taken away the variable of how these people are going to act by doing the first thing. So that kind of fixes that. However, when we do give the dog access to the guest, and while you're waiting for the dog to calm down, this gives you an opportunity to ask for help from your visitor. What does that mean? You're going to actually ask them to behave in a very specific way that is going to be conducive to your dog accepting them quicker. So it might sound something as simple as, they sit down, you're like, hey, I'm going to wait till my dog calms down. Once they do, what I'd like you to do is just kind of be sitting down, be still. I'm going to let them off leash. You're just more or less going to ignore them, let them come up and sniff you. And then when they walk away, we'll just pretend like nothing is happening and the dog's not even there. And then what you can do is tell them if my dog does show you signs of like friendliness as far as how they do with us, where they want some affection, where maybe that's a soft little nudge, or the dog rubs its like side of its body into your legs. I'll tell you, guest, when it's a good time to, trial a little bit of a pet. And that way, the person, number one, you asking them to help you puts them in a mindset of listening. Hey, can you help? Yeah. What do you need me to do? And then the second piece of it is you just take them along the path of, okay, this is the next step, this is the next step, and you progress as fast as your dog can, not as fast as the guest thinks that they should. And then, you know, that third part, which is kind of what I already talked about, is, watching the dog's body language. So we want to be a bit more aware of, okay, the dog came and sniffed, but if their face is always the closest thing to the person's body, that doesn't mean they're ready for physical affection yet. I want to see more of that sideways posture, even sitting back facing the person, but like, or physically leaning into them. Those are all really good cues that the dog might be okay with being touched. And what we can also do is, when there is some affection, is do a little bit of test the waters, which is just a quick little touch. Like almost, you can almost do an accidental touch where, your foot accidentally brushes up against them, or you do just one little quick tap and kind of just like look away. What we want to do is when I'll maybe take a step back for a quick moment, is on this, second piece of it here is, we don't want to do some of the common things that are bothersome to the dogs, which is like prolonged eye contact, leaning over, like bring your hand to them for them to sniff. The dogs can sniff really good. I don't need to bring my hand towards them. That can be, viewed as something as a little bit threatening for some dogs, not all, but it can just be a little bit off-putting if you physically gesture towards certain dogs, depending on how they're feeling at that very moment. So, things like avoiding the eye contact or prolonged eye contact, moving, forward movement towards the dogs are all things that are worth avoiding while you're developing that trust. If, for example, you want to learn the five-phase process that we utilize to help build trust between dogs and guests without putting anyone at risk, feel free to comment on this video, guests, and I can tell you a little bit more about how we help with those cases. Otherwise, I hope you got something from this, and comment and or share it if you found any value.